As you know, I am Tim, the founder of the Health Optimisation Summit, also known as the UK's leading biohacker. And today we're joined by Patrick McKeown. So just in short, he's the leading authority in the science of application of breathing. His methods have helped thousands and thousands of people with sleep issues, anxiety, blood pressure, asthma, as well as children's development. He helps Olympic athletes improve their performance through optimizing their breathing, has trained hundreds of practitioners around the world in Oxygen Advantage method. He's also the author of the best-selling books, Oxygen Advantage, and the newly released The Breathing Cure. Now, I'm a big fan of the Oxygen Advantage, which is why I've invited Patrick to speak at the summit in the first place, which we'll touch on in a minute. And he's also featured on the major platforms such as TEDx, Bulletproof Radio, Ben Greenfield podcast with Dr. McCullough, and of course, he's speaking at the Health Optimisation Summit later this year. So, Patrick, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Tim. It's good to be here.
Yeah, excellent. So after reading your book and hearing so many people talking about it and the benefits from it, it's just like, I have to explore this. I think that the attendees at the summit for this year will really benefit from it. So I'm really looking forward to chatting through and letting them know why you're coming to the summit this year specifically. So, I mean, I'll jump straight into it because I'm really conscious of your time, Patrick. But I mean, I think, what's your personal experience or journey been with optimizing breathing specifically, would you say?
You know, for me, Tim, it was a total game changer. And maybe not everybody will get the same benefits that I got, but I'll tell you where I did get benefits. I was a kid growing up with asthma. I was a chronic mouth breather. I had nasal obstruction. You don't just have mouth breathing without it impacting your sleep, your exercise performance, and your mental health. You know, we have to consider breathing. Breathing has a bad rap over the years, and it's often taught by individuals who don't understand the basic physiology of it. And they're not always going into the detail of where we need to go into it. But it was about 23 years ago, I learned how to decongest my nose by holding my breath. So, you know, any of your listeners with a stuffy nose, all I have to say is that they are 2 to 3 times more likely to have a sleep problem. Mm. So here is just straight off, you know, there's a link between one and another. And if your breathing is off, typically what is impacted most is respiratory physiology during physical exercise. You tend to have disproportionate breathlessness. Your sleep is impacted. You're more likely to have insomnia. You're more likely to snore. You're more likely to have obstructive sleep apnea. Anxiety levels can be impacted. So, for example, anxiety and panic disorder, but even just a racing mind, you know. So for me as a kid growing up, and the one thing that really, when I look back, is when I was a teenager, I was in secondary school and I was falling asleep in class. And school teacher was telling me that pretty much I was good for nothing. I should be out in the field picking potatoes. So that's what one school teacher actually told me that, Mr. Smith. So I've never heard from him since or anything. But, you know, we have to bear in mind that oftentimes there are lots of kids in school. And this isn't just isolated to children. They have poor concentration and they have a racing mind. And it can be very much due to poor sleep quality and poor breathing. That can be addressed. Society demands that we concentrate. In order for the child to achieve good grades in school, they have to have good concentration. They need to have good concentration to be able to pay attention to what the teacher is saying, and also focusing on whatever they are reading, etc. Same in the corporate environment, same in the sports environment. For any of us to excel in any mode or any endeavor that we go through in life, we need focus, we need concentration. Society demands it, but nobody teaches us how to concentrate. And that was one of the big ones for me because, you know, in terms of all of those qualities that are essential to quality of work, and I'm talking about intuition, I'm talking about creativity, I'm talking about productivity, I'm talking about the ability to handle stress. And my teacher, Mr. Smith, at the time, I remember him saying that. He said, I'd be better off picking potatoes out in the field. And it's kind of ironic for an Irishman to say it to an Irishman, but I haven't heard from him since. Now, the reason that I had this interest in school was not because I was a troublemaker, but when I look back 40 years later, it was due to having constant fatigue and living in my head that I was immersed in thought, and I didn't have the capacity to take my attention out of the mind and place it upon what I needed to place it upon. Now, you know, society tells us to think, and academic achievement, we are labeling these children and teenagers as being intelligent based on their capacity to concentrate and to do well in exams. We demand that teenagers, we are not teaching them how. We demand that office workers can concentrate and be productive. We are not telling them how. It's not enough just to talk about focused attention. We have to address respiratory physiology, and we have to address sleep. And yes, you might say that, you know, mindfulness is wonderful, and it is, but mindfulness is not going to address respiratory physiology, nor is cognitive training. So here you can imagine that there's certain cohorts of the population who are prone to breathing pattern disorders. And all I mean by this is that their breathing is not up to par. They may be breathing through their mouth every now and again. They don't have to be having the mouth open 100% of the time. Their breathing can be a little bit upper chest, a little bit faster, and irregular. And that's sufficient for dysfunctional breathing patterns. And that is going to play into agitation of the mind, keeping that person more in a sympathetic drive or more in a fight or flight response. And it's going to also impact their sleep. Now, you know, so if I was to look at what are the real tools here in terms of the breath and the application, and number one is, Tim, breathing needs to get into mainstream. It's not, breathing is not just the domain of yoga and mindfulness, which are all brilliant. Breathing is for everybody. And if anybody wants to perform to the best of their abilities, think of what we need, because by changing our breathing patterns, we can influence our blood circulation and oxygen delivery. And of course, it's not by taking those big breaths. In actual fact, by breathing less air, we can influence our blood circulation and oxygen delivery. Number two, the diaphragm breathing muscle is not just for respiration, but it also provides spinal stabilization. So if you think of all of those people who are doing exercises to improve core strength, to improve functional movement, and not necessarily considering their breathing. If we look at sleep, I had an article published in the Journal of Clinical Medicine about 3 weeks ago. I wrote it with 2 ear, nose, and throat doctors, and it's up on PubMed. And it's looking at breathing re-education and the phenotypes of sleep apnea. You know, and sleep apnea is a sleep disorder breathing that's very common, especially amongst men. And if a man has sleep disorder breathing, it's going to impact, for example, erectile dysfunction, but their stress levels, their focus, their concentration, and it has negative impacts on their heart, and it can be associated with cancer and dementia and, you know, various different conditions. So all of the major disciplines of medicine we can influence through the breath. And if you were to say to me, what was the one thing that really drove it home? And I'll come back to it. It was my capacity to hold my attention and focus and ability to handle stress, because I couldn't do that. You know, I went into the corporate world. My background is economics. I was never going to teach breathing in a million years. If somebody told me that you were going to be teaching breathing, I'd say you're mad. And I swear to God, as somebody with a background in economics, I would say run a mile from teaching breathing, because this is not, you know, this is not one of those businesses that you can be financially rewarded quickly. You know, as one guy said to me, he says, you're 20 years, it took you 20 years to be an overnight success. And that's exactly what happened. Now, I have to say, it was one of the best things that I have ever came across in my life. It was a good feeling. I was driving from one side of the country to the other. I had practiced different breathing techniques to help with my own asthma. I was able to decongest my nose. That night, I started taping my mouth back in 1998. The first morning I woke up kind of getting used to it. The second morning I woke up, it was the best night's sleep ever. And I'm going to come back full circle here. Focus of the mind and ability to handle stress. You need good sleep and you need good breathing. And if your breathing is off, you're in a state of agitation. Your mind is going to have increased racing thoughts. You're immersed in thought. You're drowning in thought. And if you're drowning in thought, you're not going to focus. So really, we should be talking about, you know, where is the application of this for the normal person, for the corporate worker, for the sports, for the athlete? And one might say, well, athletes are going to have good breathing. No, not correct. I've seen many athletes, and breathing pattern disorders are just as common amongst the athlete population as they are amongst the normal population, because it's our everyday breathing patterns which influences our breathing during sports, during sleep, etc.
It's a really interesting point, actually, because that's something that, so I've recently just finished doing a digital course, and one of the modules is about oxygen, because my background is having clinics in hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And one of my end tips was, well, if I knew then what I knew now, I wouldn't be lazy and use a hyperbaric oxygen chamber. I'd actually fix myself minutely many times a day to help oxygenate my body, opposed to rely on technology. But one is a good plaster. So it's really interesting how, I think I started with, did you know, like, you probably think you've got your breathing down because you do it all day, every day. But in fact, most of us don't. And it was quite an eye opener for me doing breath work, for several years, actually. But then refining it once I understood the backing of it after reading your book, actually. And my friend Ryan Levite on Instagram, he is a practitioner with you and did your training and certification and things. And he was actually, kept on going on about it. Like, this is more important than you realize. You really need to work on this. So it's a really interesting point. And I think most people watching this will probably go, I've not got a problem with breathing. Like, what are you talking about? It's like, well, actually, when you start measuring, and I think the other thing, this is where Aura Ring has really helped, I think, with a lot of things, because when you see that your breath rate is 15.8 breaths a minute, when it should be significantly lower than that, or when you do your Bolt score and, you can only hold your breath for like 12 or 14 seconds or something or other, it's a really good way of quantifying it. And for me, I've done breath work for a while. I should be better at it. And then I did the Bolt score, and I think I Instagrammed it, actually. This is before we connected, and said I got it to 34 seconds or something or other.
That's good.
From about 16, of where I was just like, this is an area to work on. So for those of you guys that are watching this right now, I think put your ego to one side and stop saying that you're great at something before you actually test it. It might be that you are great at it, but really, if you've got an Aura Ring, or if you do your Bolt score, which you can find out about in his book, I think that this will really tell you whether or not this is an area to nail, and some big ones.
Yeah, and you can, the Bolt score is easy enough as well. You don't need the science, equipment to do it. You just need a watch or a second hand. And basically the person is sitting down for about 5 minutes with normal breathing, and they take a normal breath in and out through the nose and pinch their nose, and they hold their breath, and they time it in seconds until they feel the first definite desire to breathe, or the first involuntary movement of the breathing muscles. An interesting study on that, Tim, back in 2018 by Professor Kyle Kiesel from Evansville University in the United States. He looked at 51 individuals. Average age was 27 years of age. He looked at their breathing from a biochemical, biomechanical, and psychophysiological point of view. So he really went into quite a bit of depth, as researchers do when they're looking at breathing patterns. And his conclusion was that the breath hold time above 25 seconds, there's an 89% chance that dysfunctional breathing is not present. So just for the listeners, if they're wondering where's the science or what's it all about, if your Bolt score is less than 25 seconds, it indicates dysfunctional breathing. And with that, dysfunctional movement. So for example, 87.5% of people who pass the functional movement screen have diaphragmatic breathing. So yeah, it's just one of those things. And I was kind of had something in my head there that went off for a moment, but I'm sure it'll come back.
No worries. Well, I mean, that takes me on to my question. And if it does come back to you, just jump in, it's fine.
Sure.
So how do people know that they're actually breathing correctly?
Well, even if we just look at Bolt score, it's a good start. And we have to consider, where should we be breathing through? Is it the nose or mouth? And most people are going to be breathing through the nose at least some of the time throughout the day. Now, look, if we look at this, 75% of the anxiety population have dysfunctional breathing. Anxiety is going to be, and this is including people with racing mind, is going to be across all disciplines. 30% of the asthma population, and between 20 to 30% of the normal population. Now, 50% of individuals wake up with a dry mouth in the morning. So here you have, and it's something that is more common as we get older. So certainly over 40 years of age, we're 6 times more likely to breathe through an open mouth during sleep. And, you know, just simple things. Do you wake up with a dry mouth in the morning? You're not waking up feeling refreshed. Has anybody ever told you that you stop breathing during sleep? Are you snoring heavily? Do you have an afternoon crash? You know, do you feel just tired in the afternoon? So let's look at sleep, and then let's look at your breathing during physical exercise. If you're going for a jog alongside your peer, do you feel that your breathing is a little bit faster and harder than your peers? And, you know, that can indicate dysfunctional breathing patterns. And I remember a few years ago, I was speaking with a strength and conditioning coach, and he'll talk about, or, you know, at the time, he'll talk about players who really have a hard time with breathing, and they're disproportionately breathless. And he would have put it down to poor condition of that player. And my point here is that you can have a team of players, they're all doing a fairly standard and consistent training. But yet some of those players will have a hard time because they have a dysfunctional breathing that's holding them back. So I suppose observation is one way to do it. And observation meaning that you're observing, is my breathing a little bit upper chest or low? Is my breathing faster? So you spoke about the respiratory rate. So we don't want a respiratory rate above 14 breaths per minute during rest. You know, 16 is a little bit on the high side, even though it is a medical norm. So 16 breaths per minute is a medical norm, but we would like to cut back a little bit down to 14 breaths per minute. We need breathing to be regular. So for example, you know, students who were assessed, their breathing was assessed pre-exam. And the students with the most stress, they had irregular breathing patterns. So you could, just by monitoring the student's breathing, you were able to determine the extent of stress in that individual. And then asked the other question. Well, if a person is feeling stressed, and when I'm talking about a stress, I'm talking about a stress when it's going to have a negative impact. You know, there's a good stress, and a certain amount of stress is good, but there's a point that too much stress is self-defeating. It's not good. That you, by changing your breathing patterns, can influence autonomic states. And this, you spoke about Oura Ring, and that's where I went off and I forgot about what I was going to say. But the Oura Ring and any of the devices which are tracking heart rate variability, and heart rate variability is an objective measure of vagal tone, or an objective measure, clinical measure of where the individual is in terms of balance of the autonomic nervous system. We don't want to be switched on all the time, nor do we want to be switched off. We want resilience. We want to be able to cope with whatever life is throwing at us. We want to be able to handle stress. And you know, a little bit of stress is very important. It's important that we have some stresses so that we can learn to deal with that. So heart rate variability is a measure, and it's very normal for people to be wearing different devices. If you talk to elite military, special forces, Olympic athletes, they're all tracking their data. And what this, the Oura Ring, etc., what that's doing is it's providing you with data. But the real question here to ask is, how can we influence that data? Nose breathing during sleep improves HRV. Breathing light, whereby you reduce the volume of air that you breathe to breathe a little bit less air. During the exercise, your HRV will drop, but after the exercise, your HRV will increase. So hypercapnia, which is indicating higher carbon dioxide, can help improve HRV. We do breath hold exercises similar to box breathing. We use it for people, especially if they're stressed out, because you can imagine it, you know, imagine somebody who is prone to panic disorder or a person whose mind is racing. And if you tell that person to go and slow down their breathing, it's not going to work. And if you tell them to meditate, how on earth is it going to work? So what we have is just simple, small breath hold exercises to help calm the central nervous system. And basically what we're doing is we have a normal inhalation and exhalation, and then a pause of the breath, which in turn is pretty much like it's causing an extension or a prolonged exhalation to stimulate the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve then is secreting a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which is causing a slowing of the heart. And it's also helping to bring the body into balance.
Mm-hmm.
And these are all simple hacks, you know. So in terms of the breath itself, if you want to stress the body, it's all in the exhalation. And if you breathe in fast and you breathe out fast and in fast and out fast, and then you do a long breath hold, that's a stressor. But if you breathe in fast and you really have a slow exhalation, that's a down regulator. That's helping to bring the body into a parasympathetic tone. And then we look at normal breathing patterns. How should we breathe? It should be light, slow, and deep. And light is about the biochemistry. Light is about breathing a little bit less air to increase carbon dioxide in the blood. The premise is to reduce the body's sensitivity to carbon dioxide. And as carbon dioxide increases, you'll feel that the temperature of your fingers improve. Because very often people with dysfunctional breathing, they have cold hands. If you breathe a little bit more air than what you need, if you habitually and chronically breathe too much air, your blood vessels are constricting. You can imagine we have 70,000 miles of blood vessels throughout the human body, and they will constrict when we breathe more air. Many people have a belief that the more air we breathe, the better. And of course, if that's the situation, you will feel the effects of that, because you are causing blood vessels to constrict, and you're also causing what's called a left shift of the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve. Less oxygen gets delivered throughout the body.
Something I just want to jump in here is actually, listeners, there's something that when I read the book, it was a big aha moment on the exact topic of what you said, is that if we're over breathing, we're actually under oxygenating, because we need the carbon dioxide to help force the oxygen into the cell. So if you're breathing too much, you've got too much oxygen, you're not dealing with carbon dioxide properly, and that's a fundamental flaw, even though it seems almost counterintuitive, i.e. more oxygen and more carbon dioxide equals more oxygen. It doesn't seem right. And the first time when I read it, I read that paragraph, must have been like 7 or 8 times. I'm just like, am I mad here? Like, and I was almost like a tug of war internally at the time of reading. You know, it's like, now I get it. It's just like, if you can't deal with carbon dioxide properly, or if you can't manage it properly, you can't get the oxygen into the cell. And that was something that really, really kind of went, now I understand it, now I get it, opposed to just, you know, breathing more and more and more and more, which, you know, might work and make you feel euphoric for a minute, but it doesn't, it's kicking the can down the road. And the other point is what just popped into my mind was you say about acetylcholine. Well, most of the nootropics, natural, and some of the not so natural, help with acetylcholine utilization, or use acetylcholine in some form, which is a nootropic, or as we see as a nootropic, like aniracetam or the phenylparacetam or any of these guys. They help your usage of acetylcholine, so therefore switching the brain on a bit more, which is one of my favorites. So what you've just said there about increasing acetylcholine as well, partly for me kind of explains abstract of how it can help with mental clarity at the same time.
Yeah, and you know, that's interesting. And none of this information is new. The Bohr effect was discovered back in 1904. And that's regarding the pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood. When CO2 increases, blood pH drops, and hemoglobin, which is the main carrier of oxygen, releases oxygen more readily. And then it was Lowy who isolated the heart in the frog and was able to stimulate the vagus nerve to secrete what he called at the time vagus stuff. And he noticed that the heart rate in the frog was slowing down. And then there was a neuroscientist called Kevin Tracy back in 1998, electronically stimulating the vagus nerve, that he could stop inflammation in its tracks. And this is really incredible stuff, because there's a number of ways through the breath by stimulating the vagus nerve. Small breath holds, slow breathing, breathing light, breathing less air, in other words, to feel air hunger, but also breathing low. So nose breathing during sleep is another one. You know, so these are different ways. And I can remember when I was that kid, and you know what, many people will be in the same boat. I was breathing a little bit faster, an upper chest, and having a regular breathing. And I never realized it was keeping me in a total fight or flight. I had no stress handling ability. And, you know, if you think of it, you know, a person's ability to handle stress, it's not just genetics. I have a pretty good stress handling ability now. I learned how to do it. I have good focus and energy levels now. I learned how to do it. So, you know, if you think of the best, and you talk, say a person that's in the corporate environment, all of those tools and traits that they need, some of them will have it genetically, but many people can learn it if they're shown how, and they should be shown how. And it's not even about being more productive and successful, Tim. But if the mind is racing, people are not happy. And this was looked at by Professor Gillingworth. They looked at 250,000 data points, trackyourhappiness.org. And they collected data points, I think, for about 5,000 individuals. And they asked them the question, are you doing something now, but are you thinking about something else? So they were gauging, was the person attentive to what they were doing, or was their mind wandering? And they find that people's minds who wandered the most were least happy. But this makes sense. You know, if I have somebody coming into me, and if their mind is all over the place, and they're so stuck in thought, I'm really afraid to give them that task, because I know that they don't have the focus on that task because they're lost in thought. And if the task goes wrong, you know, they have an exaggerated reaction towards it. Their stress levels are higher based on that situation. So, you know, this is where making tweaks to breathing, and it really comes down to, it's not how the person is breathing inside the studio. There are many studios, hundreds of studios, thousands of studios. The focus is on how is the person breathing inside the studio. The focus is on the biomechanics of breathing. There's very little focus on the biochemistry. There's very little focus on resonance frequency breathing. There's very little focus on nasal breathing, and there's very little focus on breathing during sleep. And if we want to really bring breathing into the domain, we have to think of everyday breathing, and we have to think of the application of breathing deeper than what's going on at the moment.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think the saying is we make the habits and the habits make us. So
That's
if you
true.
can integrate
Yes.
it as a strategy, and integrate it as a strategy, and then it becomes you know, compounded growth, isn't it, from there, opposed to always, it's really interesting point. And there was something else that you made me think about, and now my mind's gone blank with it, but yeah, it's gone, never mind. So okay, cool. So I mean, it really is really important to, isn't it, to bring yourself back into the moment. And I think that was my point. It's like, we are human beings, not human doings. And when we're focused on 10 different things all at the same time, it's calamity. And we evolved, yes. I mean, if you're thinking ancestral behavior, we evolved using our bodies more than our brains, not our brains more than our bodies. And now, you know, we're sat hunched over at a desk. We're not breathing properly. We're not getting our heart rate up every day. You know, we're not sleeping when the sun goes down, or eating by a campfire, and we're not being woken up by the blue light in the morning naturally from the sun, because, you know, we've got blackout blinds because we're up so late playing with blue devices. And I think, you know, if we're not breathing, and I guess it's a coping strategy from how times have evolved. You know, we used to have much more natural cardio or high intensity training, running after an animal to kill it and things, and therefore we're becoming lazier, and the body is just adapting, and yet it's, you know, reversing us, it's devolving us, I guess.
Yes. Well, it's like this, the primitive fight and flight response that people talk about, you know, that served us throughout evolution, but it's not serving us now, especially when there's a chronic stress, because, you know, it's preparing us for physical exercise, it's preparing us for fighting or for fleeing. But at the same time, we're sitting down, we're sitting on the outside, trying to maintain a calm composure, but we're running on the inside. And there's even stress in that, because you're trying to almost hide the way you were feeling. But here is where we can tap into it, because the primitive brain, respiration is at the back of the brain, the medulla oblongata, and this is where the central chemoreceptors are. They're monitoring breathing. And it is a primitive structure within the brain, but we can trick that structure by changing breathing patterns. So, for example, if we are feeling a little bit stressed, even if we just for 1 minute started breathing in and out through the nose, but really prolonging the exhalation, and it's that prolonged and complete exhalation, that information is being fed from the body back to the brain. and the brain is interpreting it that the body is in a safe environment. Because the human body knows that throughout evolution, whenever the body was threatened, breathing was always faster and harder. So we can kind of use the primitive part of the brain to our advantage as well by that prolonged exhalation. Or even if you're very stressed, you know, take a normal breath in through your nose and out through your nose and pinch your nose and hold, and even hold for 5 seconds and then breathe normal. And that will have a similar effect. And that's maybe why box breathing became popular within the military. So that you're breathing in for 4 seconds. You're holding the breath for 4 seconds. You're breathing out for 4 seconds. You're holding for 4 seconds. So that it's helping to balance the autonomic nervous system in terms of stress and relaxation to you know, flow state. But
it's like this psychological trick that they did was, if you bite a pencil, it tricks the body into thinking it's smiling, and therefore you have more
very good
chemicals. Yeah, it's really interesting how there's some studies in psychology. I've been in psychology for the best part of 20 years. And yeah, I will never forget being taught that. And in the class, they got us to put a pencil in our mouth, and there was various exercises on it. So I guess if you're doing the box breathing, which I am a huge fan of, like in bed, just as I'm about to go to sleep, I actually do the box breathing, usually for 2 minutes. Sometimes if I'm feeling a bit, I don't know, whatever, I increase that to 5 minutes. But it's amazing how it becomes background after a while. But it really does, I think, trick your body into thinking that it is in a more rested state, because as you say, if you're breathing faster, it's obvious that there is a stressor. So if you then bring down your breath work, just like if you force yourself to smile, then you know your physiology and your body language and everything changes at the same time.
Yes. Yeah.
We're very, very simple, but very, very complicated creatures, aren't we?
Yeah, and you know, breathing is just one of those things. And they've done, like, there has been studies done, for instance, with rats, young rats, and they blocked the noses of the young rat pups, forcing them to mouth breathe. And the mortality rates within a very short period of time, I think it was by day 8, 37% of the young rat pups had died because of the stress levels. So when we're thinking about breathing, and, you know, I always remember, you know, having these debates and various conferences, and sometimes a doctor will say that it doesn't make any difference if you breathe through your nose or breathe through your mouth. And then I would ask the doctor, well, doctor, what does the mouth do for breathing? Does the mouth regulate volume? Does it harness nasal nitric oxide? Does it warm the incoming air? Does it moisten the incoming air? What does it do? It does nothing. Absolutely nothing. There's not one function performed by the mouth in terms of conditioning and regulating volume before that air comes into the lungs. Basically, the mouth is a hole that you can breathe through, but it's your nose that does all of the work. And the nose is the only organ in the human body. And the nose is also directly, of course, connected to the brain. So there was one study looking at memory in terms of nasal breathing versus mouth breathing. And by breathing through your nose, your memory was enhanced. Now, despite this, Tim, 25 to 50% of studied children are persistently breathing through their mouths. Our ancestors were not mouth breathers. Our ancestors were nasal breathers. They had really good, strong jaws. They had forward growth of the face. They had good airway. They didn't have a face like mine, where my nose is bent and my maxilla is set back and my lower jaw is set back. I'd have never been an athlete. I wouldn't have even got on the bench because I didn't have the airway to be able to handle the volume. I didn't have the anatomical features that are associated with elite athletes. And elite athletes are usually good-looking individuals. Yeah, there's a few exceptions, but in the main, they're generally good-looking individuals, because a good-looking face is a functional face with forward development of the jaws. Think of the cartoonist who's drawing a picture of the alpha male. How do they draw the jaws? Are the jaws set back and the person has no chin, or are the jaws really exaggerated? So both for the male and female, there's something in this.
That's Andy Nilo from Alachua. If you've ever seen him, he's like Johnny Bravo in real life. He's like the most incredible looking guy with the biggest jaw. I know exactly what you mean. I think the other thing is when you say that our ancestors were nose breathers, not mouth breathers. Well, this is something that my friend Dr. Dominic Nitschwitz, he's a biological dentist, speaker at the summit, and a dear friend of mine. But he always says about breastfeeding. We breathe through our nose when breastfeeding, which helps jaw development.
Yes.
And, we're supposed to eat through our mouths and kiss with our mouths, and that's about it. And, it's there as an emergency for breath, for breathing, but not as an everyday thing. And we're trained through breastfeeding to nose breathe, and yet we let go of that and we become lazy. And
yeah, well, part of this is society, because you can imagine young couples, and both young people have a large mortgage, and the only way that they can service it is that both of them work, and there's so much pressure on young families to have kids early because of the biological clock of the female, and yet to have a really good education so that you can get a good job. So there's a conflict there. And yet then to be able that both people are working. Like, breastfeeding is not just about nutrition, but it's about manipulation of the muscles of the face necessary for craniofacial growth. Another aspect that contributes to this is, of course, the food that we eat. When we're eating soft food, everything is pre-mulched up. You think of the people who are the kids who are eating, going to the likes of McDonald's and Burger King and all of this. This was none of this stuff. We weren't eating this as our ancestors. We probably wouldn't survived as a species if we were eating that stuff. We were eating hard food. We were eating plenty of fruits, vegetables, and meat that was probably the worst cuts possible. And it took a lot of effort to chew through the meat, and that was helping to develop the jaws.
Yeah, a very, very, very good point. I mean, I think so. One thing I'd like to, there's a couple of questions, but I just want to touch on what people can do, is that on the cover of your book, obviously various diseases from epilepsy to insomnia and diabetes and how breathing is linked to chronic diseases. You go straight into that. And also the front of the book mentions COVID and how to use breathing to recover from it. So I just wanted to touch on those quickly before we talk about what people can actually do.
Yeah, well, first of all, your nose, I'm not going to say that nasal breathing is going to prevent COVID. It's not. But the only thing that I will say is that your nose harnesses a gas called nasal nitric oxide or nitric oxide. And when you breathe through your nose, nitric oxide is antiviral. So whatever chance we have of having our first line of defense, it's by breathing through the nose and not through the mouth. The other thing about nose breathing is that there is a resistance imposed to our breathing when we breathe through the nose. You will know that when you go and do physical exercise. The person goes and does physical exercise with their mouth closed. They feel an increased air hunger because they won't get so much air in and out through your nose. Now, if COVID is transmitted airborne via water particles, as the belief is, well, it doesn't make sense to be sitting there or standing there with your mouth open because you are taking a larger quantity of the virus straight into your lungs. So the person who's infected, if you breathe out through your mouth, there's a 42% greater water loss. And again, if the virus is transmitted airborne, the person who's infected, you can imagine that they're in their family home. And if they have respiratory issues with that, they're typically breathing harder and faster. They're going to breathe through the mouth because they're feeling they are not getting enough air. And as they breathe through the mouth, they're going to emit a greater amount of infected particles into the atmosphere. Another aspect is there a way to breathe to improve oxygen transfer from the lungs to the blood? And there is. And it's not about hyperventilating. It's not about taking these full, big, big breaths. It's not about overbreathing. But even if the person, you could use this with pulse oximetry. And pulse oximetry is a little finger probe that you put on your finger, put on the pointing finger, and it's measuring your blood oxygen saturation. So a person with COVID or any person who wants to improve their SaO2 or SpO2, simply have your hands either side of the lower ribs. And as you breathe in, to feel your lower ribs gently moving out, and as you breathe out, to feel your lower ribs gently moving in. But then to slow down the respiratory rate. And ideally, if you were to breathe in for 5 seconds and out for 5 seconds. So by slowing down the respiratory rate, It reduces the amount of air that's lost to dead space. So if we think of every breath that we take, 150 milliliters of that air doesn't reach down into the small air sacs in the lungs. So normally a person with COVID, if they have respiratory complications or respiratory issues, they're going to be breathing faster. So we'll say that they have 20 breaths per minute. And we'll say that they are breathing shallow because they're caught for breath. So 20 breaths per minute is the respiratory rate multiplied by the tidal volume. You have 20 by 300, which is giving you 6 liters. So 6 liters of air is drawn into the body. But we need to find out how much of that 6 liters has actually got into the small little air sacs in the lungs. To find that out, we have to subtract dead space. So we have a respiratory rate of 20 multiplied by a tidal volume of 300, but subtract dead space of 150. So now we're left with 20 by 150, which gives us 3 liters. So the unfortunate individual who is feeling air hunger and suffocated and caught for breath, they'll typically respond to alleviate that feeling of suffocation with fast, shallow breathing. But yet in the example that I gave you, 50% of air is wasted in that instance. So their breathing is totally inefficient and totally uneconomical. And even if you were climbing a mountain, if our goal is, regardless of the individual, anytime our blood oxygen saturation is below normal, how can we breathe to enhance alveolar ventilation? So if I was to go with the maths there, instead of breathing 20 breaths per minute, even to slow it down to 12 breaths per minute, and to allow the tidal volume to increase proportionately. So 12 by 500 mil gives you 6 liters, same as before. But now when we look at alveolar ventilation, it's 12 multiplied by 500 subtract 150. So 12 by 350, and it gives us, I think it's 4.2. So already we've increased alveolar ventilation from 3 liters to 4.2 per minute. And you can even improve that by slowing down breathing to 6 breaths per minute. So Tim, you know, COVID, nobody or very few people have paid attention to breathing. I put a YouTube video out in last March, a year ago, and I put it out there for COVID, and it has had about 800,000 views. And I went through all of the breathing exercises, and the same exercises I would say today. You know, if you're caught for breath, do small little breath holds. If you're in a situation that you believe that somebody is infected, don't stand there breathing. Hold your breath and get away from it. You know, just small little things. If, for example, you are really caught for breath and you're monitoring your blood oxygen saturation, gently slow down your breathing to enhance alveolar ventilation, because the greatest region of blood flow is in the lower lobes of the lungs. And nose breathing, it's known since 1988 that the pressure of oxygen in the blood, the PO2 millimeters of mercury pressure, increases by 10% when you breathe through your nose. This is because you're taking the air into the deeper regions of the lungs, but also you're harnessing nasal nitric oxide, which helps to redistribute the blood throughout the lungs. Now, this information doesn't just apply to people with COVID or people with respiratory issues. Think about the person who goes for a run, the person who's in the gym. How do they normally breathe when they're in the gym? They're exercising, their mouth is open, and they're breathing fast and shallow. Doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense that universities and sports science has overlooked this. It really doesn't. There's one professor who is now looking into it, Professor George Dahlem from the United States. And he did a study of 10 recreational athletes. He got them breathing through their nose exclusively for 6 months. And after 6 months with nasal breathing, they were able to achieve 100% of their work rate intensity, but with 22% less ventilation. So there's adaptations that happen when you breathe through your nose. Your nose adds an extra load onto your breathing during physical exercise, but think of the benefits. It helps to improve respiratory muscle strength. It's taking the air deeper into the lungs. It's increasing CO2 in the blood. The increased carbon dioxide is helping to improve your blood circulation. It's also helping to improve oxygen delivery to the working muscles. You're likely to stay working aerobically for longer. And also, nasal breathing is less traumatic to the airways, you know, because your mouth does not condition the air on the way in.
Well, it's really interesting. It's almost like we were designed to work that way. But no, in all seriousness, is when I first, and this was early last year, I guess, I was trampolining, and I realized how much I was mouth breathing while trampolining. And I was just like, I'm going to try and do it nose breathing. So yes. I tried doing it, and I kept on finding that my mouth was opening again. It's like, damn it. So actually I did a post on Instagram about it, where I started mouth taping while trampolining, and it killed me. It literally killed me. Like I could not do it. And then after doing breath work, holding my breath while walking a certain amount of distance, doing various other exercises as well. And also I tried Wim Hof breath work, which I guess I know that goes against a lot of the principles.
No, within, it's a stressor, that's all. Yeah, it's a stressor.
Yeah, I found that doing all of these things and testing various ones, after about 2 to 3 weeks, I guess, I could fully trampoline pretty much ongoing without opening my mouth once, having my mouth taped, and there was no panic response, there's no worry, no nothing. But to start with, it was almost like, well, when people try mouth taping at night, you know, and I was one of these guys as well, woke up in the middle of the night, panicked that I couldn't breathe because my mouth was there. And it happens like 3 or 4 nights, I generally hear, where people are in fight or flight because they think they can't breathe through their mouth, and then they get used to it. After a while, trampolining became easy and I didn't worry anymore. Yeah. It shows how amazing the body is adapting and operating as it should if we stop being so bloody lazy.
But it's a really positive, it's a very positive adaptation. And I think the reason why people are mouth breathing in a gym is because it's easy, but it doesn't make sense. Now, in terms of taping, can I show you a tape that we use? And
please,
like, I have a vested interest in this. It's my own design, but the reason that we brought it out we brought it out for children. It was always challenging. I've been working with teaching kids as well since 2002, because children who mouth breathe, it can affect their craniofacial growth. And even more than this, there was a study carried out by Karen Bonnock in Stratford-upon-Avon, obviously in the United Kingdom. She looked at 11,000 children, and she looked at children with sleep disorder breathing, of which mouth breathing is a factor, a contributory factor. Children with sleep disorder breathing, if they were untreated by age 5, they had a 40% increased risk of special education needs by age 8. This isn't just about waking up tired. This is about the cognitive development of children. Children who are mouth breathing, they have 10 times the risk of learning difficulties in school. And, you know, this is really the problem, because your dentist friend will know about this. And there are some wonderful dentists who know about this, but the industry has not looked at it. The entire industry, it's really, we need the universities, we need the influencers in dental and medicine to start looking at the potential with nasal breathing. And the science is there. So in any event, just in case people are thinking, oh my God, he's saying use duct tape or use this. No, there's a couple of different options. One that we did use traditionally was 3M 1-inch micropore tape, which is a tape that you buy very cheaply down your local chemist. It's hypoallergenic and it works. Now, we would never recommend that for kids or teenagers, or if you have anxiety. This tape we use is called Myo tape, and it's relatively inexpensive. It's $25 for 3 months supply, but it's designed like this. So we also have a new one coming out called Myo Sport. So just as you were talking about, but it's not going to be bright orange. It's going to be skin colored. So we stretched the tape by about 40%.
I see. Clever.
And it's pouting the lips. So it's also activating a muscle here called the orbicular source muscle, because you'd be working with some kids, and no matter what you did with breathing exercise, you were able to open up the nose. And that's the other thing that people need to remember, Tim. We can open up the nose in 5 minutes by simply holding the breath. And any of your listeners can try it. Once, don't do it if they're pregnant or if they have serious medical conditions. But take a normal breath in and out through the nose, pinch the nose and hold, and just walk on the spot holding the breath until you feel a medium to strong air hunger. Then let go and breathe in through your nose. Try that 5 times. Your nose will generally be freer than what it was. So the tape is for the person with anxiety. It doesn't cover the lips, but it brings the lips together. And that has been a really great help for us, because now we can say with comfort, I think it's really important that you do get your mouth closed at night. Don't wake up with a dry mouth in the morning. Now, if you wake up with a moist mouth in the morning, you don't need anything. So this is for people only if they're breathing through an open mouth during sleep.
Yeah, it's awesome. Awesome invention. I mean, there's a few little mouth taping things gone around, and one of them I saw that was like about 30 pounds a month. And it's like one pound, so it's $1.20 a month, a night. And it's just like, that is just not accessible. But if you're saying 30 euros or 30 pounds for 3 months, then I think that's pretty good.
No, it's 20 pounds for 3 months.
20.
Yeah, it's $25. And that includes international delivery. Because I suppose this is my work for 20 years, you know, and okay, people might say it's because but this is a work that I absolutely love doing, and I see the benefits of it. And now it is starting to get out there, Tim. It doesn't make sense for people with asthma to go around with their mouth open and breathing hard and fast. It doesn't make sense for people with anxiety or sleep apnea. And the studies are all there. And here is the frustrating thing, that the studies are there many, many years, you know, going back even as far as back into 100 years ago. And it's really something that we need to start changing. Perceptions, not just perception, but awareness is what we want to change.
Yeah, amazing. I think there's some really interesting points there. I mean, I think I just want to touch on one thing that I mentioned before we started recording, was the AeroFit. And, you know, I don't get commissions. I'm not an affiliate or anything like that. In fact, I turn down all affiliate commissions and everything, because I just like to talk about the things that I use and believe in myself. And then if they're great, I invite them to the summit to exhibit. But the AeroFit, I mean, I originally heard about it and on Instagram, because I had targeted ads pointing at me, you know, and I was having 3 or 4 of them a day. And so I reached out to them and just said, look, you know, I'm really into my health. I consider myself a kind of an influencer. Breath work is an important part of my daily routine, you know, and I want to try this. My one reservation was that it was mouth breathing opposed to nose, and I would love them to do something for the nose if they could. But their answer was, which is a very valid point, was if you can focus on nose breathing 99.99% of the day, doing your breath work test for lung capacity and lung compliance for 0.01% of the day, and you can measure your improvements, then it's worth it, which I kind of agree. And I find that it's been fun for me having it on the coffee table every morning when I sit down and do my 30 minutes of reading, and in my to-do list, I just have it as one of my points to do. And having, you know, 2 minutes with this thing, measuring it and seeing how I'm focusing on my breath and tracking it. So I'm actually seeing in data the quantification of improvements, just like Aura does for sleep. Instead of just going, oh yeah, I feel better, or yeah, you know, I'm sleeping better. You can actually see it in the data, which then increases compliance, because, you know, as a result, you know, biohackers or everyone with an Aura ring seems to gamify their sleep. Yeah, I got a 92. It's like the Holy Grail. But without the Aura ring, you could never do that, and it wouldn't gamify it. So I think that's where these guys fit in really well. Not only is it helping you progress, and this isn't a plug, it really isn't. It truly is something I'm enjoying doing. But I think it's it's also with having it sitting on the side or investing in one of the units or something like it. It's there, it's physical, it's in front of you. It's an anchor point to remind you to do it every day if you don't have a task list or whatever. And also it's fun and quantifiable. So, you know, it's, before they answered, I was going to say to you, Patrick, what do you think of mouth breathing with this thing? But they answered it so bloody well. So I'm hoping that they do come to something.
I think it's an interesting product. It's improving respiratory muscle strength, and we have our own product as well that targets that. And I think it's important that the breathing muscles are strong, and especially with athletics, and also I suppose with COVID, because we don't want the breathing muscles to fatigue. And physical training typically doesn't improve respiratory muscle strength. So you could do all of the running in the world. typically it's not going to improve it. The only sport that might improve it is swimming. Now, where you could improve it would be nasal breathing during exercise because of the extra load. So that device is respiratory muscle training. You have it in your mouth, you're breathing against resistance. It's adding an extra load onto the breathing muscles. You know, it's positive.
Yeah, it's good. Really cool. The other thing I just wanted to touch on with COVID, and I'm not going to go there too much for obvious reasons, but one thing that I've heard from several medical professionals or colleagues in the industry is that people with wearing a mouth face mask all the time, actually they're finding a lot more people with eye infections, a lot more eye infections, in fact, because obviously the air is coming up and out. Opposed to the nose, evolutionary speaking, points away or down, and the mouth outwards. So, so that was point one. Is there's like actually eye infections and things. So it shows that the air that we breathe in and breathe out is really important for other factors that we might not even think about. But the other thing is that how do you? So a lot of people say, well, how can you breathe with a mask on all the time? Because
this is a really good point, Tim, and I meant to say it because people have been told to wear a mask, but they have not been told how to breathe wearing it. When you wear a mask, it's pooling carbon dioxide because you have carbon dioxide coming from the lungs into the mask, and because it's pooling carbon dioxide, then you're rebreathing that carbon dioxide and rich air back, which is entirely safe, by the way. So it's increasing CO2 in the lungs, which in turn is increasing CO2 in the blood, and the person feels air hunger. So the mask is creating a slight feeling of suffocation. But then how is the person reacting to the feeling of suffocation? They're opening their mouth and they're breathing fast and shallow. And this then is contributing to panic and to anxiety and to fatigue. Now, you know, I've even heard some people saying that when you wear a mask, it drops your blood oxygen saturation. It will by a small amount. And the only reason being is because if you pool carbon dioxide and you're breathing that carbon dioxide back into your lungs and it's increasing it in the blood pH is dropping, but hemoglobin then starts releasing oxygen more readily. This is a right shift of the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve. So you will have a very small percent drop in the SpO2 and your blood oxygen saturation, but it's actually positive. Because your hemoglobin is releasing the oxygen. Like we have athletes, I showed you this earlier on, we have them purposely wear a mask. And part of that is to pool carbon dioxide, to reduce the body's chemosensitivity to carbon dioxide. You know, so I think it's important that not to just tell people to wear this mask, especially for a long time, unless you teach them how to breathe while wearing the mask. And what I would say is breathe nose, breathe slow, and breathe low. Yeah, cool. Because I was going to ask you about the extra carbon dioxide and whether or not that helps you with the release of, or should I say, getting oxygen into cells. So you nailed it. So thank you. That's awesome. So, thank you very much for this. I mean, I'm going to move on just to touch on quickly about your new book. So, yes. I mean, I just like to give a summary, a quick abstract summary of it so people can know what to look for. Obviously, you'll be doing a book signing at the summit as well later this year as well. So people will be able to get a copy signed then if they buy one after seeing this video. But yeah, so if you just want to give me a quick overview. Yeah, it was work that has been going on for about 4 years, and I wanted to look at breathing for the application of a number of different conditions which haven't been touched upon, but yet the science is there. One was female breathing. It's been known that females breathe differently to men since 1905, and especially because of the monthly cycle. So you can imagine females post-ovulation between days 10 and days 22, mid-luteal phase, there's an increase in the hormone progesterone. That in turn is a respiratory stimulant. The female now is breathing faster in upper chest. She has increased pain, lowered pain thresholds, fatigue, anxiety, depending on the female. So that's something that's really important for the female population. Diabetes, and I just had a podcast this morning with Nick Heath, and this is looking at the application of slow breathing to influence the autonomic nervous system in diabetes. And it's really, really important. He, for example, is a diabetic since 12 years of age. And by getting his mouth closed during sleep and by slowing down his breathing, his diabetic control is much better than it was when he was doing physical exercise and diet, but also 10 to 20% less insulin. And of course, I'm not saying that this is a cure, anything like that, but what I'm saying is our whole objective is to try and influence the autonomic nervous system to improve control. Epilepsy, asthma, sleep disorder breathing, functional movement. You know, if you think of all of those individuals who are targeting and looking to improve core strength and are training the abs, and as Stuart McGill, and I quote him in the book, there's no science behind that. So we have to think of the core as a box. You've got the pelvic floor at the bottom, you've got the diaphragm to the top, you've got the abs to the front, you've got the spinal muscles to the back. Diaphragm breathing is very important for functional movement. And without functional breathing, you're not going to have functional movement, and the individual is at a greater risk of injury. And then panic disorder and anxiety. So it's looking at breathing. It's a big book, but I've made it as simple as possible, I'm hoping. But I thought it was very important to reference this as well, where I can, to support it, because I really do want to put breathing out there. And I would love to be, I'm only one of those contributors. Of course, there are many people around the world that are doing wonderful things getting breathing out there. But I think this book will make some contribution that way. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, it's amazing how one of the most basic things known to man, you know, whole physiology, and yet we're not experts in it, and we have to spread awareness of how important it is. It seems bonkers, but I guess it's similar for me, like grounding. Grounding is slightly different, but also the same, just not awareness, and how much of an impact that has on the body. When you combine that with breath work or yoga and functional movement and things like that, the wins are just massive, aren't they? So just first of all, where can people get hold of the mouth tape that you showed a little while ago?
The website is myotape.com. So that's myotape.com. Yeah. And even if you, I suppose, go in on our Instagram channels, Oxygen Advantage or Buteco Clinic.
Yeah, okay, amazing. So yeah, I think so that's where guys can find you, butecoclinic.com or the oxygenadvantage.com and Instagram, Buteco Clinic. So, so as just to wrap up, what is one thing that people can do today to improve their breathing? So if there's one thing that you could choose, what would it be?
The next time when you're sitting down this evening and you've got 5 minutes to yourself, just put one hand on your chest, one hand just above your navel, and start slowing down your breathing to the point of air hunger. Gently slow down the speed of the air coming into your nose and have a really relaxed and a slow exhalation. And really slow down the speed of the air. Almost breathe hardly any air, imperceptible breathing. You need to feel air hunger. Check if you can influence your blood circulation. Can you improve the temperature of your hands by virtue of slowing down and reducing your volume breathing? And check the saliva in your mouth and check your state of drowsiness. In other words, it's a down regulator. And you know what? This is the best thing about breathing, because you can typically get results pretty quickly. And the best way to understand it is to practice it.
Amazing. Patrick, thank you very, very, very much for your time today. It's been amazing. And we've literally got through so many points today, which are personally good for me as well. So thank you very much for your time. And I'm really looking forward to welcoming you to our stage in September this year.
Looking forward to it. My pleasure. Thanks, Tim.
Right. I hope you enjoyed today's interview, and if you want to meet the speaker live and get your book signed, check out the Health Optimization Summit. It has 50 speakers, 100 of your favorite brands exhibiting, 1,200 other health optimizers just like you, over 2 days, with one huge European community. Check out summit.healthoptimization.com. And if you're overwhelmed by all of the health things that you're hearing and don't know where to start on your health optimization journey, check out my health optimization program. It's a step-by-step digital course to guide you through the fundamentals of health. It has how-to guides, a private Slack community to support all your questions, and will help you master your health optimization journey. If you're wanting to dramatically optimize your health, quash fatigue, take control of your diet, and optimize your health once and for all, this course is for you. Check out course.healthoptimization.com.